But his critics say that he is a traitor who knowingly endangered the men and women who work for the United States government, both in the military and the diplomatic corps. So is Bradley Manning a traitor or a hero? Joining me now with their takes are Ray McGovern. He's a former senior CIA analyst who writes and speaks out about his experience in the government working in the intelligence field. And from London, John Higginson, political editor of the Metro newspaper, which is the largest free newspaper in the world. Ray, John, welcome to The Heat.
Most welcome.
Let me start with you, Ray. You worked in the government. Is he a hero or is he a traitor?
Well, I don't use the term hero lightly. I think he's a very courageous young man who had the courage and the conscience to do the kinds of things that I should have and did not have the guts to do during Vietnam.
John, your take.
He's a traitor. He has signed up to be a soldier. When he signed up, he signed the oath of allegiance to America, and by releasing these documents, randomly, huge numbers of them, lots of them that he didn't read himself, he has endangered the lives of his fellow soldiers.
Well, you were in the CIA. If you were in the CIA now, would you like this stuff coming out? I mean, isn't that's one of the big complaints, is that he's putting lives in jeopardy. Do you think that's the case?
Well, it's a spurious complaint. Sure, the defense secretary and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff screamed that as soon as he released the first bevy of documents. And the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee said, well, Mr. Gates, Secretary of Defense, give me a memo on that. 6 weeks later, there was a memo from Mr. Gates. He said, oh, contrary to our worst expectations, no one has been harmed by this. As a matter of fact, reports that this has endangered things are, quote, significantly overwrought, end quote. So it surprises me that you would still come back to that saw, which has been completely discredited.
Okay, John, no harm, no foul. Is that how you see it?
No, we have absolutely no idea how many Afghans have seen these documents. What we do know is that Osama bin Laden had these documents when he was killed. We don't know if the American forces had to move in early because he had documents that told him that American forces had their eyes on him. Had they not moved in when they did, a few days after these documents were released, he might have escaped again. He might be sitting in Afghanistan now. More soldiers might have died. As I say, we don't know how many Afghans are at the moment fighting ISAF forces because they've seen some of the things here. Now, whether you agree with the way that the government has fought or not, you can't have privates suddenly deciding, when they're given this confidential information, that it is in their gift to tell the whole world about what's happening and hand this stuff to the enemy.
Ray, I see you smiling, but he's making a point here. You know, this is sort of above his pay grade. But why should a private be allowed to disperse this kind of information?
Well, it's hard to know where to start here. We're in a time warp, okay? Bradley Manning had been wrapped up long before Osama bin Laden had been wrapped up. And so there's no possibility that Osama bin Laden would have learned about their efforts to catch him in this one place. Additionally, you know, what we're dealing with here are gradations of values, okay, ethical and moral values. Now, promises are important. And when you sign a secrecy oath as a matter of condition of employment, that's important. You don't dismiss that lightly. But when you see war crimes, and that's what Bradley Manning saw, war crimes. Now, that video that he released, the so-called collateral murder, well, there are war crimes shown on that, to include the shooting of people trying to rescue civilians who had been wounded. Now, not shooting, but killing them, all right? Now, the Secretary of Defense said that was all within the rules of engagement. Well, if that's true, then the Secretary of Defense and the whole military establishment is guilty of war crimes. That is very serious. And what Bradley Manning did, said by his own admission, that he thought the American people deserved to know what was really going on in Iraq, and that there was no one else to tell them because everything was been suppressed. There was a Washington Post reporter with that unit. He wrote a book saying the good soldiers, and he suppressed the information in that video, even though he had seen it.
John?
It is the job of a soldier when they sign up, when they sign that oath and they say they will fight for their country, they will make the ultimate sacrifice. That is not their job. We have to trust our politicians to do these jobs. We can't have privates at a low level deciding these things, whether they agree with one thing or the other, putting it out to the enemy for the whole world to see. It just cannot go that way. And if you don't punish him, what happens next? Can you not have a situation when anyone can keep secrets? And if anyone at any level decides, I don't agree with this, I'm going to put this out on the web. You have to have some kind of punishment, some kind of way of saying, these are people that we will give you these rights and responsibilities, but you have to respect them. And you have to go through the proper way. If you think something's gone wrong, go to your highers and betters. But don't do it this way. Don't just carpet bomb all this information, lots of which you didn't know what was in there. He couldn't have known. He distributed so much stuff, he couldn't have known everything that was in there. And it was massively irresponsible. And it's caused a whole lot of bad.
Let me get Ray to jump in here, because you were in the secrecy business. I mean, he's making a really good point. If you can't keep any of these secrets, it does harm the government in the end, doesn't it?
The question is whether war crimes should be kept secret. Now, Bradley Manning had a conscience, okay? And he was able to see at 22 years of age that there is something called a supervening value, okay? A value in stopping killing, stopping murder, stopping wars. And that supersedes or supervenes the promise, legitimate though it may be, to keep these things secret. These things were kept secret to enhance the national security, not to cover up crimes. And so I applaud Bradley Manning for having, he did go to his superiors. He said, do you know what's happening? Do you know what's happening to these young people who wrote a term paper that was critical of the government of Iraq? They're in prison now, and you know what happens in those prisons. And they said, go home, keep your mouth shut, go back to the States, just keep your mouth shut. Now, he could have kept his mouth shut just like everybody else, right? But he said, no, I got a conscience. That's why he was morally, morally fit and morally courageous enough to say, I'm going to take great risks, and I'm going to let this thing out because that's the higher value.
So, John, he's saying you make a pledge to your country, but then the other, issue is really kind of moral and ethical. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, but wars are very ugly. Wars are ugly things. People are killed, people are dying, and there will be people in wars that step over lines. Now, I'm not saying that that we should be accepting war crimes, but I'm sure if you took the other side, I wonder if any Afghan soldiers committed any war crimes. I wonder what would happen to them if they released secret information to the Americans that the Americans could use against them. I'd love to hear what would happen to them.
You get the final word on this one.
Well, I just think that you have to take a long look here. And when you see a young private who, by his own admission, has said he had no other recourse than to do this, when he offered them to the Pentagon, that is, when Assange offered them to the Pentagon and the State Department to redact, and they said, no, we're not interested in trafficking in stolen goods, there was not much more to be done than to reveal these things, and the discussion that has ensued, despite what's happened to Bradley Manning, has been very salvific and very courageously pursued.
John, thank you for joining us from London. Ray, thank you so much for stopping by our studio.
Most welcome, Mike.